What do you think, guys? Should we kick it all off? They can jump in when they want to jump in. Okay, so you've all heard me talk about the rainbows and the nice scuddy showers that came across for the first couple of days. So yeah, we can move on. And as I said, we were 1 year ago today. Would have been day 3 of 22. I would have spent the night here. I think, as I said earlier, this photo was taken in the morning. So we were packing up, getting ready. The firewood wasn't the greatest at this site, as you can see from the smoke. So starting off this presentation, I'll give a bit of a run through about logistics and planning and that sort of thing. I originally gave this presentation when I got back to work, but I mainly gave them the pretty photos, but just for the UNE Outdoor Club stuff, I threw in a bit more about the planning and logistics and that sort of thing. Skills that you can have if you want to plan a similar walk. And then after that, we'll just go into lots of pretty photos. So maps just gives you an idea of where we were. So you can see you've got the Hunter Valley here with Newcastle. Sydney down here, and this is Wollemi National Park. So I pretty well crossed Wollemi National Park, almost from the northernmost point to near the southernmost point. So this is Martindale Valley. It's where I grew up. My parents still live there. And I started about here and walked down to Bilpin, which is on this road down here. So yeah, a reasonable way. And you can sort of think about that I traveled about the same route as the Putty Road, but just a bit further west. So logistics, there were 22 days, including 1 rest day. Hadn't planned the rest day, but we ended up having one and making it up on the rest of the days. It was about 160 kilometers flat. And so it's probably over 200 kilometers in the real world. That's just estimated drawing a line on a map. So by the time you put in all the ups and downs and the zigzags, you're definitely over 200 kilometers. Started off with a 23 kilogram pack. The first night was a dry camp, so I had 6 days of food and 2 days of water. I initially weighed 79. When I got to the end, I had a 17 kilo pack, had some spare food left, and I'd lost a couple of kilo. And I managed to wear out 3 walk partners. For the first 6 days, I had a friend, Alice, and her father joined us. And then they obviously had other commitments. Unfortunately, my father, who was going to do the entire walk with me, ended up injuring his knee on day 11. And so he left then, and I finished the rest of the walk solo. So some route planning. I was lucky, I was pretty familiar with the first 6 days. I'd walked quite a lot of it. My dad had walked the stuff I hadn't. For the southern half, they're much bigger cliffs, and I'd never been there before. So we caught quite a lot of local knowledge, got some passes, which were very, very useful. You'll see in some photos later just how big the cliffs are. Majority of the walking was on ridges, generally easier terrain, easier vegetation, particularly as I was doing this after the 29-20 fires. And so most of the time I was actually walking through well-burnt country. Often had a dry camp every second night because we were up on the ridges. You weren't easily able to get water. So you were doing the picking up water and carrying 2 days worth of water, then dropping back into a creek. Very lucky with water that Wollemi protects the top of the catchment. So I only had to use chlorine pills on the last 2 days where you're walking below some civilization. The rest of the time I just drank the water straight, no boiling, no chlorine. This is just a bit of a snippet from the table. So when I was doing the route planning, I went through and filled out this table. So obviously I've got days, I've got the map, how many kilometers I think I'm going to walk. We certainly didn't push ourselves, but when you're navigating in completely off-track terrain, it can be quite thick at times. You don't want to try and do 20K a day. Besides, you're there to enjoy it. And then a rough description, and I also had a water and a food column, just to give a visual. And I had them coloured blue as a visual way to look down and go, there's no days where there's 2 or 3 days where we're not getting to water. So yeah, just if you're doing something similar in the future, that was how I did it. I found it quite effective. So getting on to what I had in my pack. So setting off either from a food drop or from the start, I had 6 days worth of food, aimed for about 900 grams per day, enough to carry 4.5 litres of water. That's 2 days and 1 night, plus, a bit of spare just in case. I took billies and an emergency metho cooker, which we used once just to have a warm drink. The rest of the time we were cooking on a fire. You've got to light a fire to keep warm, and it's Bushman's TV, so you may as well cook on it. In terms of sleeping, I had a fly sheet that I could string in the air and a bivy bag. It was quite windy for a lot of the time, so we just used the bivy bag. Nicer times we had the fly sheet up. Later on, I've got some photos of the campsites and the setups, so you'll be able to see how we use those. Decided to take some spare / river walking shoes. We were in some quite remote places, and you didn't want to have to do 3 or 4 days walking in bare feet to get out. So had a spare pair of shoes just in case something happened. I did try to melt the soles off my boots. They made it out, but just goes to show you what you can do. I had 15 meters of pack haul or scrambling rope, either lowering your backpack or stinging it around a tree, do a bit of a plastic abseil down if you need to. Certainly very handy, and I used it quite a few times. I had all the maps laminated, got them laminated in town. And so, yeah, we had, always had 3 or 4 laminated maps in the pack, the ones that we'd need for that section. Carried a Garmin InReach. That's a GPS, but it's also a communication device. I could send text messages via satellite, and you could actually pre-program them, which is really useful because typing in on it wasn't very friendly. So I could, at the end of a day, I could just say, send standard message 1, which was something like, had a good day, safe at camp, just so that the parents could knew all was good. And when you send a message like that, it also sends your location so they could work out where you were. First aid kit, of course, and a personal locator beacon, a repair kit, lots of, duct tape, cable ties, sewing kit, all the things that you might expect. Some spare straps and buckles for the backpack. And for me, I definitely needed some spare glasses because it would have taken a long time to walk out as blind as I am. So food, I didn't buy the fully made dehydrated meals. A, it would have been expensive, and B, I enjoy doing a bit of camp cooking. I did carry one of them as an emergency in the bottom of my pack, and carried it all the trip. Had a food resupply every 6 days approximately. I met the parents along the route where the route crossed a fire trail. I didn't do any pre-burying of caches. Obviously, you can do that, but in this case, I didn't. And meeting people along the way had the advantage that I was able to swap out clothes and a sleeping sheet and have a sponge bath. So that was always appreciated. So I think this is the last second last, organisation slide. So just giving an idea, I designed 6 meals, trying to balance a bit of nutrition. Once you're doing a 22-day walk, you have to start thinking about those sort of things. So I had 6 meals, which meant that I didn't have to repeat a meal between a food drop. Had lots of pulses, lentils, beans, chickpeas. The beans and chickpeas I carried fresh just because they take too long to cook from dry. Tuna, freeze-dried mince. We actually also thermally dried some at home, and that worked quite well. Dehydrated mashed potato, noodles, freeze-dried rice, peas and corn, dried mushrooms, tomato paste, spice mixes. You can change meals a lot with spice mixes. Herbs and spices, they're light, they give a lot of flavour, make it interesting. Lunch and snacks, we had homemade muesli bars, Vita-Weats and spreads. That was pretty well lunch. Dried fruits and nuts. I've put some numbers in here just to show you, for the entire 22 days, it was 12.3 kilograms. Go as diverse as you can. I've never been a big Brazil nut person, but for a couple of days in the middle, all I wanted was a Brazil nut of all of them. So, these things. you get strange cravings. We had hard-boiled eggs for 2 days after each food drop. Jerky, chocolate, generally eaten as a dessert thing after dinner. Again, 600 grams of Milo for the trip. That's one of the big tins. And we pre-mixed it 1-to-1 with powdered milk. And breakfast was 9.5 kilos of muesli and powdered milk. So yeah, once you start putting it all in a pile, it adds up pretty quickly. So now we get to the pretty pictures. If anyone's got any questions about that or what we've just covered or anything in the pretty pictures, just unmute yourself and ask. More than happy to be interrupted. So this is the crew. This is me, my dad, Alice and her father. And this photo is taken at the gate to the house yard on the property where I grew up. That hill behind us is the first hill we'll summit. And this is just a photo of us walking down the road. We had about a kilometre, maybe a bit more, along the road, and then we backed into a neighbour's paddock and up the hill. This is us setting off. This is lunch, top the first hill. So the white arrow shows where we started. That's the house I grew up in. And then, yeah, we walked up the road, across the paddock and up the hill. Had lunch sitting on this cliff from memory. Just a note too, I haven't run this slideshow isn't just in order. I've sort of grouped them together. So there'll be a thing about ridges and a thing about creeks, a thing about plants, that sort of thing. So yeah, we've got the, this is a little geological feature that me and Alice actually discovered on an earlier walk called the Bridge of the Gods. It's this really narrow rocky saddle. This side is a bit steeper than this side, but yeah, you can just walk straight across this quite narrow. I think there's some additional photos here. The other cool thing about it is it has a natural arch through it. So not only is it a cool narrow rocky saddle, but it actually has a natural arch. So occupation, this was a real surprise. I don't know if any of you keen-eyed people can see. There's actually a wooden bed in this cave here. So yeah, it was a real surprise. We were a couple of days from the nearest road or fire trail, and we just climbed up to the top of a hill out of a creek, and we're looking for somewhere to camp amongst these boulders. It was still a really strong wind, so you're wanting a bit of shelter. And yeah, we found this bed. Looks to have been touched up quite a few times. There are a few different ages of string on it. Some of it was polyester type string, so it was relatively modern. But they had all the comforts of home. They even had a kerosene lamp hanging from the roof of the cave. And there was a couple of billies and a little homemade rocket stove in the back of the cave as well. No other signs. Didn't seem like anyone had been there for a while, but yeah, we've asked lots of people and, given the location out, but yeah, we've got no idea of, what the story might have been, whether it was a criminal running away or someone just wanting to live their best life in the top of a mountain. But obviously, while there's that sort of occupation, there's also much, much older occupation. This is a cave that's known as Sheep Cave, because the first people to find it thought that these look like sheep. Generally, archaeologists are thinking that they're actually emus or another ground-dwelling bird, similar ground-dwelling bird that are tilted onto their side. These are quite big drawings. I could stand up in this cave. So these are almost as tall as me. So yeah, very big drawings, and just a beautifully magical spot. The valley below this, I think there's some photos later, are just absolutely gorgeous. Lots of ferns and big trees. And there's a road actually only 50 meters above this cave. And this is Mount Yingo, which is the most sacred Aboriginal site in the Wollemi and one of the most sacred places in New South Wales. It's illegal to climb it or do anything with it. The Aboriginals even don't like helicopters flying over it or being in one that flies over it. So yeah, a really, really sacred special spot. It's said to be the last footstep that the creator god, Beami, made on the earth. There's a series of sort of flat-topped mountains across the Wollemi. And as you go from west to east, they actually become taller and less flattened. And the legend is that they were his stepping stones back into the sky. And so you could tell that he was getting faster and stepping lighter each step. So yeah, now we get to some creeks and rivers. So this is Wollemi Creek. You can see it's fairly wide and fairly deep. Nature provided this quite nice bridge for us to walk across. That's Dad on the crossing. This pool here would have been well over head depth. Was quite deep here. Actually lower down, it actually spread out a little bit. So this was really nice walking. The banks, as you can see, are pretty well chocker, full of vegetation, but you could just walk down the creek here under the vegetation. The water was only sort of ankle to mid calf depth, though there were some sneaky spots of quicksand. So you did have to be a bit careful, because otherwise you'd end up to your thigh in sand, and be a bit wet and cold. But yeah, it was, you know, a beautiful walking, almost a day of just walking like that down the creek. You also got orange creeks. This is a bit of a feature of the area. Martindale Creek that I grew up on would regularly turn orange like this. The water is still fine. It's crystal clear. It's actually the soil surface and anything in the water that turns orange. And it's an iron oxidizing bacteria. They actually take the oxygen out of the water and oxidize iron, and that's their chemotrophic. That's how they get their energy. There's some quite iron-rich seams of rock around the Wollemi, and so you've got the iron coming in the groundwater that's anoxic. And then when it hits the creek and there's oxygen, these bacteria grow in big colonies, and they'll coat logs and do anything like that. So yeah, you get, you know, it's really impressive to see. This is a beautiful section of Anglewarra Creek. You have probably 2 kilometres where you're just walking along rock platforms and beautiful pools. You can see we're starting to get into the southern half of the walk. The hills are getting pretty steep and pretty rocky. But yeah, Anglewarra Creek was just absolutely gorgeous. Here's another one. I managed to time the water level just right. I didn't have to get wet the whole way down. I managed to walk, find a way around all the pools. But yeah, just incredible, gorgeous spot. This is getting very close to the end. This is saying goodbye to the Colo River. As you can see, we're starting to get into a pretty big watercourse here. We've got Colo coming down here. We've got the Wollongambie River coming in here. And you've just got this beautiful beach of white sand. I was the first human to put footprints on it, and there are actually very few animal footprints since the last flood. So that's, you know, that's always a bit special. And I think there's a few more photos. These next 2 photos are just to show you how clear the water can be. This is climbing up out of Colo River, looking down into the Wollongambie. And so you can see down here, we've got a big, nice pool of water. And this next photo was actually taken from exactly the same spot, just zoomed in. And so even from a long way up, you can see all the rocks on the bottom. The water was just absolutely crystal clear. It was gorgeous. If it had been a bit warmer, you know, the ultimate swimming hole. But and this is the Colo River from the top of the pass out. So the photo a couple of slides earlier of the nice sandy beach is down here at the bottom of this ridge. And I've climbed up and out. You can see just how steep some parts are. You know, that's a good, probably 100 to 200 meters. This ridge out was pretty steep in itself. It was 300 meters vertical and 500 meters horizontal. So there was quite a lot of scrambling and that sort of thing to get up. But yeah, the Colo is an amazing river. I came in probably up down the side creek up to back here and then walked down here. There was some quite hard walking. It's very rocky along the edges and quite thick vegetation, but beautiful nonetheless. So ridges, obviously we've got a decent amount of company here, so you can tell this was one of the first days. It was also not burnt, so this would probably be either day 1 or maybe early day 2. After that, we entered the fire zone. But you can see just how nice walking along the ridges can be. Really open vegetation, sort of grasses and forbs with big trees over the top. Again, this is once we're into the fire, but you can see that it's coming back. But yeah, again, very nice, open, easy walking. Similarly, normally these rock platforms are areas I've walked before, and normally it's incredibly hard and thick. All of this dead-looking veg here is sort of growing in swamps amongst the rock platforms, and it can be really, really thick and hard. But thanks to the fire, it's pretty easy to walk. You might notice there's a big can here. There are a couple on this platform, and we think, when we first found them, we did some investigation, and we think we've actually met and talked to the surveyor who, unable to see all the trigs he was wanting to see, built cans that's where they should be, and then did the triangulation off that. So it's quite a long way out. It's a day and a bit's walk from a fire trail, but there was a surveyor who went out there and was doing some work. The northern half of the Wollemi was generally a state forest before it became national park, so he was probably out there looking at putting in some logging tracks and that sort of thing. Why isn't the there we go. So yeah, this is towards the end. I think this was on the last day when I was walking out. You can just see how much devastation the fire's done here. But yeah, this soil was incredibly sandy and incredibly shallow, and so all you've got is just mallee eucalypts dominating, with quite a lot of regrowth from the lignotubers occurring. But it was really quite hard walking this, because as they died, they'd become stiff, and so you're pushing through really stiff dead branches rather than relatively soft, bendy, fresh ones. I think this is the last photo of walking along ridges. This was just to show all the epicormic growth. These are, obviously hit very hard, very black trunks, but they're all regrowing. And I imagine if you went back there now, it'd be thick and hard to walk through. A bit like this, when you get richer areas, there's some basalt influences that sometimes appear in Wollemi. You get recovery like this. This was often chest deep, and along with all the fallen timber and things, could make walking quite hard. But the hardest of all was Hardenbergia hell. For those that don't know, all these purple flowers, which are very pretty, are on a vine. And so they were tying everything together. And when you had several kilometres of this to walk through, it made life slow going, to say the least. And this is just a photo looking back. This is Mount Monondilla, another one of the flat-topped mountains I was talking about earlier in connection with Bayami. But we passed that on day 6. There's a trail just on the southern side of it, where Alice and her father left. But this is from day 12 looking back. So that's 6 days walking between there and there. Plants. Those that know me know that I like plants, and so you won't get out of a slideshow without seeing some. This is me and Alice botanising with something. It was a bit early for it to get the really spectacular flower show, but nonetheless, we got some really nice orchids, like this little guy, and this one as well. So yes, got lucky. You can sort of see my tent over in the background here. I think this was on the second last day. And we've got some native irises as well. They're look leaf-wise and flower-wise a lot like a cultivated iris, but they seem to grow in the toughest spots. They're always on top of ridges, amongst rocks in the sandiest soil. And yeah, here's some more. I think we've got a Croia and a Racinocarpus, or a wedding bush. Again, especially towards the end of the walk, because as I said earlier, we started about now, but I finished in early September, and by the end of the walk, you were getting a lot more flowers. It would have been nice to have shifted it that week or two just to get more flowers more often. This is a cute little bush I thought I'd put in. This is my compass. So they're about 10, it's probably about 10 centimeters long. So you can see that this isn't big. And one of the campsites, I was actually struggling to find anywhere to put camp down because I didn't want to lie over just the field of these. It was really quite spectacular. Tree ferns and nice tall straight eucalyptus. This is actually the valley below where the Aboriginal art cave was. The Aboriginal art cave would be up on the escarpment here, and the valley below was like this. It's just absolutely gorgeous. You can see that's a pretty big tree fern. And this is a pretty big tree. There's a bit to spare either side of my wingspan there. And looking up, it looks like that. The top of it had actually been blown out. So it would have been taller once upon a time, but it would have been easily 70 meters, 80 meters, maybe taller. A very big tree. And we walked under plenty of, that was probably the biggest one we saw, but we walked under plenty of similar sized trees. So campsites. As you can see here, we're down in a gully. I think this is early in Wollemi Creek. So you can see we've got the flights, 2 fly sheets up. One, that's me, I think, and that's Dad. Fire going, ready to cook dinner. Always a bit of an interesting thing trying to pitch on a sandbank. Generally, the easiest way to do it is to dig a hole and bury a branch, tie your tent ropes to the branch. If you jump up and down on the sand enough, it compacts and stops pulling back out. So yeah, that's obviously a nice spot. This is an earlier camp. This was night 2. It was absolutely blowing a gale. We actually decided not to cross the Bridge of the Gods because it was blowing too much and we might get blown off. So this was an attempt to find a nice sheltered spot tucked away down behind this cliff to shelter us from the wind. This is Alice and her dad was sleeping in a tent here. Me and Dad just bivvied. I had slept in my bivvy bag just there. I think Dad was over here somewhere. And we had the fire up in this little corner. But yeah, it was interesting. You'd occasionally get this big roll of wind to just come down and mess everything up and then to go back to being nice and quiet again. Yeah, this is a nicer, more open, smoother campsite. I was traveling by myself at this point. But yeah, just a beautiful spot, nice open sandy ridge. I've rigged the fly up with, I think it's tied to a tree on this side, and then I've just broken a branch and used it as a tent pole on that side. There was no wind and it was only a dew protector here, so I could have it nice and high, not be claustrophobic. And this was probably the most interesting campsite of all. I actually slept on this ledge here. It's a bit hard to see, but this roof actually comes all the way out, and so that ledge is sheltered, which was good because we got a thunderstorm that night. And I hadn't seen anywhere to camp for the last 2 kilometers. It was pretty rocky and thick like this. So yeah, a pretty special spot. I had my campfire over here, near the edge, but protected from the rain. It was raining by the time I had my fire going. And the access was a bit interesting though. You actually had to walk into the creek and then boulder up onto here. And it probably would have been about 2.5, 3 meters tall from there down into the creek. So yeah, a pretty special spot, as long as the water doesn't rise too much overnight. So yeah, that brings us to the end. This was a photo taken on the last day where the parents picked me up on this road here. And yeah, I've paraphrased John Moore slightly there. So I'll have a look at the chat, see if there's anything that anybody's asked or said anything like that. Okay, so I guess, yeah, any questions, anything like that, feel free to turn your mic on and ask away. Or So Ben, it was a Eucalyptus denii, which is closer out to quite similar. Has round juvenile leaves rather than, but yeah, otherwise quite similar. What time of day would I look for a camp spot? Depends. Sometimes, you'd find a campsite and it was just too good and you had to stop a bit early. But generally, sort of looking at stopping around between 3 and 4 gives you a chance to have a bit of a rest, do it all with daylight, prepare dinner, do all that sort of stuff. Sure, Emily, I can put my email in the chat here. So yeah, in terms of when there's not many spots, yeah, if you see one and you are a bit worried, you can grab one earlier. I'd potentially start looking at 2 o'clock, even 1 o'clock. You always note them down mentally and say, okay, if it gets to 3 and I haven't found anything and it's not looking promising, I can always walk back if I need to. Yeah, in terms of the 0.9 food was certainly enough to get there. Obviously, that's not counting the water that you need to rehydrate the dehydrated stuff with if you're not beside a creek. But yeah, generally we found that pretty well to live on. Didn't lose too much weight, so we did pretty well. I think in terms of food, the one mistake that I did make was I left all the food preparation till I got to my parents' house, and they did a lot of the shopping. And then obviously there were just things that I would have liked to have had, that I assumed that they would have had because they're in my pantry, but they didn't have. But otherwise, yeah, it worked out pretty well. Now so from Kara, total pack weight, I'll have to go back because I can't remember, but I think it was in the, how fast can I go back? Is there a fast way to do this? Can I go through, let's see if I can go to the end and go back. That worked. I'll just have to bring it back up again. So looks like, yeah, initial pack weight was 23 kilos. So that was the heaviest it was the entire walk. Starting out on day 1 with 6 days of food and enough water to do a dry camp the first night. I admittedly, you could probably do it lighter. I've got, a fairly heavy big canvas pack. But, I probably carried some things that other people would be like, oh, you don't need that, but it's nice to know that you've got. And, I said that I was young and strong, and so therefore it was all good. You can see, my final pack weight, I had, a day or two spare food and some water, but it was still at 17 kilo. So it wasn't, down at the 9 or 10 sort of kilo weight you might see for people who are doing it really light. And obviously we had 2 forms of accommodation too, which, just those sort of things, the flexibility and adaptability, you trade off for a bit more weight. Jenny, in hindsight, not much I would have done differently. I think I did a pretty good job planning. Yeah, I mentioned the food, obviously. Potentially, yeah, again, there could have been that little bit of rationalization of what I had in my pack, maybe get a little bit lighter. I think, on a not for me personal note, I should have probably screened dad a bit harder. He's quite an experienced bushwalker, but he's in his early to mid 60s, and he told me that he'd be fit and he'd be fine, but he did struggle a bit. And he admitted later that he probably should have possibly not come. It slowed us down quite a bit on the first sort of days. We'd get there, but it would take us all day, and we couldn't sort of sit around and enjoy, relax. Scott, not at this stage. Hopefully soon. Map slide, yep. I can go back to that and show you. Or yeah, we're sure it must be here. So this is sort of the map you were looking for. This is showing the entirety of Wollemi National Park. For those that weren't on a bit earlier, I started up here in Martindale Valley. That's where I grew up, and then walked down to Bilpin, which is a township, I think, about here on this road. The people that came in a bit late, would you be interested in me running through the first few slides again? I'm happy to show these. As I said, you may have missed it. This is actually a pretty good time for me to be doing this presentation, because 1 year ago today, I would have been sitting at this campsite here, day 322. So it's a year since I did the walk. So yeah, we had a look at maps. We had a look at the logistics slide. So yeah, if you hadn't caught the distance, measuring it on a map, drawing a line, it's about 160 kilometers, but probably over 200 kilometers in the real world by the time you account for the fact that you go up and down these hills, and you swerve a bit more than your line on the map. So yeah, I just had a bit of a chat about route planning. Because I grew up in Martindale Valley, I was familiar with the first 6 days. But I sought a lot of local knowledge for the second southern half, where there's bigger cliffs, and I'd never been there, had no experience. Talked about the fact that we did dry camps, and so had to carry quite a bit of water. And you only used chlorine pills in those last 2 days. Once you hit the Colo, you've got Colo Heights and some other little villages above, and so you didn't want to take any risks, but most of it is wilderness, and so you can just drink the water straight. And yeah, this was just a mock-up showing how I did the planning. I filled out this table for each day, maps, kilometers, descriptions, just as a way of sitting it out and planning it. And then I used this, including the grid references, to trace it onto the maps. I'm not sure where people came in, and I won't read through that, but you're more than welcome to have a read through that. That's just some example pack contents. Obviously, it's not everything, but it's sort of the things I thought that people might find interesting. Okay. Oh, no, Ben, I think the bouldering pad would have been a bit bulky. Much as it would have been nice. There was one night where there was some really amazing cliffs camped at the back of that had some really nice crack lines and things, but no, other than the 15 meters of pack haul rope, I didn't carry anything. Yeah, I think, unless anyone's got any more questions or anything, probably call it a night there. One thing that have been asked to ask is this something that people would like to see more of? Is there anything else that we can run during lockdown? I was going to be running a map and nav course later in August, and I'm more than happy to run the theory side of that online. Obviously, anything that's a practical side of things will have to wait for lockdown to end, but I'm more than happy to run that map and nav theory. Okay, I'll stop. I'll if I can get the computer to behave, I'll stop sharing and call it a day. Thanks everyone for coming along. I hope you enjoyed it.